Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Katie Valentine. I'm the director of DSF Discover, our online learning platform for Disciple Seminary Foundation. And with me is the person you're all here to hear from, Shonda Jaw. Hey, Shonda.
How's it going?
Good, good. We're really glad you're here. As people are rolling in, we would love to just learn a little bit about you. Your name will appear, but tell us like where you're from this evening. And I want to make sure that you can hear me. So if you do that, that'll be a little sound and technology check for us too, just to make sure that we are visible and audible for everyone. Hello, Richie. Glad you're here. Hi, Pam. Hi, Linda. And can everyone hear me okay? I'll wait for total confirmation for that. And many of you may have, thank you, Robin. Robin said 2 wonderful women in little side-by-side windows, so I appreciate that. I have in front of me my copy of Shonda's book, and we'll be using this as inspiration tonight. If you have a copy, you may want to grab it, but you don't need one. So if you don't have one, it's okay. All right, we have confirmation. People can see and hear us. So I won't delay too much longer. I'll just give you all a little bit of introduction. Shonda has graciously agreed to join us and talk about her book and the power of transforming communities. This is with DSF Discover. You will be receiving some follow-up information from us about additional information and links and opportunities that we have. So I'll be looking forward to hearing from you all. Again, my name is Katie Valentine. I'm going to go ahead and type my email into the box so that you can all email me at any time, just in case you have any problems or any questions. You can use the chat box at any time during the webinar. I'll be monitoring that. If you have any technical questions or just comments that you want to make, this is the place to do it. I see people writing in. We have someone from Oakland. So hey, glad you're here. So I think that's all of my nuts and bolts. Shonda, did I miss anything nuts and bolts wise?
Nope, other than hi, Richie.
Hey, Richie. So let me just begin today with reading, and I'm going to commit a cardinal sin. I'm going to read the last page first. So this is the very final page of Shonda's book, but it's a very nice recap and inspiration to what we're going to be talking about tonight. So let me encourage everyone to really give yourself the gift of the next hour. We'll be here about an hour. Turn off your ringers, grab a pen and a notebook if you don't have one already. Close your browsers, give yourself the gift of this time where you can really focus and we can listen to the Spirit to see where we are all being called to transform our communities and our neighborhoods. So with that, I will read this as our opening devotion. You are exceptional. You are smart, you are gifted. If you care and seek to collaborate, you will transform your community. We do not have time for you to feel prepared and worthy. We need you to join with others to heal your neighborhood now. Do it as a beacon of hope or as a sign of resistance or simply as a way of living out of who you know you are. Do it for your neighborhood and do it so that others who feel unprepared and unworthy know that it is not an impossible barrier for them. And with that, Shonda, I will turn it over to you.
Fabulous. It's such a gift to be with you all today, and I am really, really grateful for the chance to be with y'all. I hope that this doesn't seem overly aspirational, but the subject for today is transforming your community in 10 ways that anyone can do. For those of you who don't know me, a few of the books I've written include Transforming Communities, the one that we're here to talk about today, Pre-Post-Racial America, Spiritual Stories from the Front Lines, which is also available as an audiobook. One of my friends said it's really fun to listen to Shonda read you bedtime stories at the end of the night. And Room at the Table, which is about the history of people of color in the Christian church, Disciples of Christ. So my hope for us over the course of this hour is that we get to delve a little bit into some of the concrete reasons that we're in a less inclusive and less compassionate world than all of us who are on this webinar desire. I'd like for us to talk a little bit about why focusing on our neighborhood matters when so many of the issues that are frustrating or concerning us are national issues and even global issues. Why does it matter to focus on our local communities? I'd love to focus a little bit on what people have tried in their local communities, regular people, people like you and me, that has worked, and finally, how you can make a difference in your own community. Now, my guess is part of the reason that we have joined each other this evening is some shared concern about the direction of the world right now. I'm wondering, have you felt any of the following ways in the last few years? Have you found yourself feeling depressed as the news has rolled in, as things have felt beyond your control? Has there been something that has settled into your body? I know one of my friends was asking just today whether it was depression or just the reality of the world that we live in that makes her not want to get out of bed in the morning. And I think it's a good question for us to wrestle with. Have you felt angry? I think that that's an important question because for community organizers, what is it that ticks you off is the starting point of a community organizing project. And it's an important question to ask, and it's right for us to be righteously indignant. But for anybody who's been feeling angry for a long, sustained period of time, it takes a toll on our bodies and our psyches. Anger is not a sustaining emotion, even though it is a completely reasonable one. Have you found yourself feeling overwhelmed? It can be so easy with all of the news that's coming in for us to feel like there's just nothing I can do to make a difference because the problems are so big. That can get in the way of our relationship to ourselves, our relationship with those around us. It can even get in the way of our relationships with the divine. And despondent, I'm going to be super transparent about this and say there are definitely times that I have felt despondent about the conditions that we are facing today. In fact, not just despondent, but sometimes hopeless. And I wonder if any of us, myself among them, have felt all of the above. There are studies coming out these days that the nation is feeling a growing sense of hopelessness and despair that shows up as depression in our bodies. And it's not just depression of the sort that when we experience it, we should rightly get therapy, or we should rightly make sure that we're getting the medications we need. This is a depression that is settling in across the country as a result of the overwhelming news that we receive on a daily basis and the way that news is building up literally in our bodies. But the reason we're here today, the reason that I'm excited to be with you all, is the reminder that there actually is hope. In the book Transforming Communities, I've shared the stories of 10 different methodologies that regular people like you and me have used to affect change. Some have taken off to such an extent that they're now part of a national and, in a couple of instances, international movements, but they can still be done one neighborhood at a time. And they all started in one neighborhood. My theory is any of you on this call could do any of the things that I'm going to be talking about this evening. It's just about us figuring out what fires us up enough to connect with a few other folks around us and help give birth to what our community needs. First of all, I'd like to back up a little bit and reflect on the question, why are things the way they are right now? often in the news, you'll see people talking about our current political moment as if it suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But I think it's important to be aware. If you've been despondent about things like hate crimes, public policy that hurts women and immigrants, a lack of change in mass incarceration, defunding of programs that help seniors, people with disabilities, people who rely on publicly supported affordable housing, and our air, water, and land, it's important to note or remember that this didn't happen overnight. This didn't suddenly happen to us. It's interesting that only in the past few years, some of the archived tapes between Richard Nixon and Eric Haldeman, who were the president and one of his advisors back in the late 60s, early 70s, they actually had a strategy that they developed and launched to build up a right-wing movement, to move forward a strategy of increased militarization and increased privatization, decreased funding of programs for people in need, and they very intentionally started that movement by building out what we now refer to as the religious right. That movement was 50 years in the making. They funded numerous think tanks, and they built out numerous policy institutes, but it started with a grassroots movement. That 50-year campaign started way back in the late 60s, school board by school board, town council by town council, church by church, until people had garnered enough power and enough finances to start taking over state legislatures and regional denominational bodies, and eventually build up power to the point that they could establish federal legislation to do serious harm to people on the margins of our society. Now that's depressing. It's not great news to hear. But the thing that I think is important for us to remember if we hold on to that history is this moment, this presidency, these national laws have been 50 years in the making. But the good news is we're at the beginning of the next 50 years. And this is why you are so important. It's really important for folks to be fighting critical battles at the national level to protect the people and land and water and wildlife we all love. But for those of us who aren't necessarily called to that national work, there is a critical need for us right now. We need to build the foundation of the next 50 years, neighborhood by neighborhood, town council by town council, church and synagogue and mosque by church and synagogue and mosque. So what I'd like to ask you to think about right now is what foundations we already have in this group. What are you up to already? And once I've gone through these different categories, we'll actually have a quiz. I would love to know, are any of you involved in direct service work? That means projects that help people in dire need respond to their immediate problems. So programs like food pantries, shelters, job training, recovery services, helping individuals get the help they need so that their lives can be better, one person at a time. I wonder if any of you are doing advocacy work where you recognize that there are other people who have different lived experiences than you who are struggling, and you advocate on their behalf. Programs like Bread for the World and Amnesty International and MoveOn.org all give people a chance to advocate for policy changes, for legislative programs on behalf of people in dire need. I wonder if any of you are up to advocacy work. I wonder if any of you are involved in organizing, which is a little bit like advocacy work, except that it usually is grounded in in shaping campaigns that are driven by people with lived experiences. So where advocacy is advocating on behalf of someone else, organizing is building up power among people who experience problematic programs, problematic policies, and we work for change that will affect us directly. And organizing bodies include PICO and Gamaliel and Industrial Areas Foundation, and the organization that used to exist called ACORN. In California, there's now a reborn version of it called ACE. I wonder if anyone on this webinar is a part of alternative community building. You heard me say that it's really important for us to fight for policy changes within the existing systems, but some people have also chosen to say, you know what, I'm going to spend my energy building up an intentional community that's maybe not directly involved in existing policies, but is building up our own kind of community outside of those systems. So tiny home communities are an example of alternative community building, or cooperative living, where people are redistributing resources in a different fashion than the traditional materialist model that our society usually functions out of. People who are part of live-work collaboratives, where workers are co-owners in spaces. That's another example of alternative community building. I wonder if any of you are involved in that. And so at this point, I think Katie's going to help us actually do a quiz so we can learn a little bit about what you all are up to.
The quiz is turned on, and we do need people's responses. In addition to you learning from Shonda, we're also learning from you. We want to know what you're doing. So we will actually be taking your live results. And if you do happen to watch this on replay, participate. Your results will still come in. So we have a lot of people are involved in direct service work. Some people in organizing. Don't see anything yet for advocacy or alternative community building, but we have a few that are saying, hey, that's what I'm here to find out. Seeing where they'll be directed. But direct service work is by far right now the largest percentage.
And I think the good news for all of us is that there is a need for all of those things, and there is a need for all of us to figure out where our energies can be focused. So while you're continuing to fill in that survey, that quiz, that poll, I wanted to share an interesting experience I've had recently. I was just doing a workshop on this exact subject, and 10 years ago, when I was working with this particular group, there were many faith communities that were running soup kitchens or food pantries. And this time, some of the exact same people who had come to my workshop 10 years ago were in the same workshop. And this time they said, oh, we're part of establishing a navigation center, which is a whole wraparound service program where people get to move from homelessness to shelter, to temporary housing, to permanent housing, as well as getting job supports, as well as getting addiction services, as well as getting mental health services, as well as getting veteran services, whatever it is they need. So it was really beautiful to me to realize that folks I've been working with for a long time have moved from the work of providing charity to, over the course of a decade, listening to the voices of the people that they were serving, asking them what they needed, and building out support services that actually responded to the articulated needs of the people they cared about. So a navigation center means I don't have to live on the streets anymore. I can get a job. I can find opportunities that provide me the dignity that I deserve. There's a famous quote by a South American bishop, Dom Helder Camara, who said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist. I was struck by that quote because he was suggesting there was no worse words to be called, and yet what he was doing was moving from charity to solidarity. The longer we are in relationship across class, across race, across all of the differences in our lives, the clearer our understanding of how to support people facing different challenges than we face. There's a common expression these days, which is listen to women. That phrase, listen to women, is a cry for solidarity. Instead of deciding what we need for us, listen to us. Listen to what we tell you we need. This approach of solidarity opens us to the possibilities we might not otherwise have imagined. And in these relationships between equals, we bring things to the table we might not have realized were gifts we had to offer. More on that as we continue. And Katie, is there an update on what people responded on the poll?
Yes. 67% direct service work, 7% advocacy, 7% organizing, no alternative community building right now, and 20% people here to find out.
Excellent. That's what we're here for. That's great. So let me share very briefly why I wrote the book, Transforming Communities. I've been in organizing work for over 20 years. And for those of you who think of me as a pastor, from my vantage point, good pastoring is actually community organizing. Now, I wrote this book because I realized how many people, just like me, except that they didn't have 20 years of organizing experience, were feeling like they didn't know what to do in the face of all of the struggles that we're dealing with right now. So my goal was simply to share stories different from what you see in the news. I wanted to share stories where people did things together rather than some lone hero swooping in and saving everyone, so that people didn't feel terrified of the overwhelming and impossible task of doing it alone. I wanted to share stories where something started small and built up over years of relationship building and investment in community, so that people didn't think there were quick fixes. And I wanted to share stories where things have lasted a long time, so that people knew they were building a legacy, not just trying a flash in the pan thing before they moved on to something else. So that's why I wrote Transforming Communities. But what I learned by writing Transforming Communities was there are some key ingredients to success that were true for all of these stories. They all started local. None of them started as a major, huge national initiative. They all started with a handful of folks with a shared vision. They all involved lots of listening before taking action. They involved building trust so that people wanted to work together. They utilized people with expertise like data analysis or policy expertise, and they valued that. But the most important expertise in shaping strategies was the lived experience of people most impacted by the negative issue in their community. That is, they were framed by solidarity, not just charity. And I would invite you to reflect a little bit on the work you've been most inspired by in your life and whether it included some of those components, and the work you've been most frustrated by and whether it was missing any of those components. So like I said, I focused on 10 different methodologies. I'm about to delve into them deeply. So they're all here on one page, but I'm not going to walk you through them. The only thing I'm going to say is there will literally be a quiz at the end of this. So I want you, as I go through these 10 methodologies very briefly, to reflect on whether any of the ones I'm about to share with you are things you're already doing so that you can share your stories, or which of these sparks your interest, because I maintain almost anyone with a passion for this could do any of these methodologies in any community, rural or urban or suburban, anywhere in this country and many places beyond. So think about which ones resonate as things you've got some experience with, and which ones you'd like to delve more deeply into, all the while remembering you could do any of these. Because no single one of us is a hero, but any group of a few of us can be the hero our community needs. So the first example I want to share with you is asset-based community development. This is something that you can find 500-page manuals on, that whole courses get taught about in schools of public health and public administration. And that sometimes clouds the fact that when this model, asset-based community development, first emerged, it was literally a handful of folks in a poor and underserved community who said, people from outside are constantly coming into our community and telling us what's wrong with us. What if we built a campaign for our community based on what's right with us? The image I have posted here is a group of people in an underserved community on the coast of Australia, the east coast of Australia, were asked the question, if you took me to your neighborhood, what would you show me? And so this illustration shows all of the things that the people in that neighborhood are really proud of, that are the foundations on which they can build a movement based on the gifts of that community. When we are told over and over and over again that we have no value, that we have no worth, we start to believe it. And there's something revolutionary about asset-based community development and this notion that I am and my people are worth more than this world keeps telling us. So I love the fact that they've got the Thunder Sky Gallery, this little community art place, and they always talk about, they highlight the gardens that folks have and the ways that they share their food with each other at the harvest party. They've got a picture of a tiny little guy named Tim who's got a whole sheet of pins, and it says, Tim, button making, buttons are his jam. So there's this quirky guy in the community who's always wearing buttons and is always showing you his newest button. And they recognize that that's an asset, that the quirks and the charm and the individuals within that community are actually assets. When we engage in the process of asset-based community development, we can actually start recognizing the power that we have to affect change instead of believing the narrative that's been told about an underserved community, that it doesn't have much value. Now, I recently did a workshop on one-to-ones with a group of folks in Illinois, and I think they were struck by how simple this was, but because they thought, well, isn't that just having conversations? And yeah, all a one-to-one is having a conversation. It's having a conversation with someone about what they are passionate about, what drives them, what gives them energy, what kind of legacy they want to leave. And if you have enough of those kinds of conversations with the people in your community, you can learn what aggravates them, what ticks them off, so that they can organize to affect change. But if you ask the right questions, you can also learn what gifts they have, what it is they want to contribute, so that they can be honored in the process. I mention this because the example I use in Transforming Communities is Recovery Cafe San Jose. Tiny, tiny little congregation that was struggling to survive. They had a heart for homelessness and helping people who were dealing with the intersection of homelessness, mental health issues, and addiction. They found that one of the barriers was the people living in the community around them not wanting lots of homeless people there. They started having one-to-one conversations with the homeless people about what their needs were so they could build the right programs, and also with the neighbors about where their hearts were, what their passions were, how they wanted to contribute to a better San Jose. one of the stories that Dana, the pastor of the church there, shares is that because of one-to-one conversations, one of the crankiest local business owners in that community is now an occasional donor to Recovery Cafe San Jose, because he recognizes, despite the fact that he still has his complaints and his frustrations, that he wants to be part of the solution to the homelessness problem. He doesn't just want homeless people to go away, he wants homeless people to have a thriving life. That wouldn't have come up if they hadn't had some very intentional one-to-one conversations with the people who could have been the biggest barriers to their success. Some of you are already familiar with restorative justice as a practice. It's very big in Oakland, California, and it's being practiced in every school from junior high down, and in many of the high schools as well. One of the beautiful things about restorative justice is where it emerged from. In Canada, there were a disproportionate number of Aboriginal and Indigenous people who were in the jails and prisons, and they said, you know, this whole retributive justice process you've got in place, yeah, you've got us locked up, but you're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to change anything about the dynamic between us and the people we've done harm to. You're not trying to restore the damage that was done to us that led to us becoming part of this cycle in the first place. And you know what? Our ancestors had a better way of dealing with justice issues. It's a restorative justice circle process and victim offender reconciliation work. What's fascinating to me about restorative justice, first off, is that it's the result of listening to underserved and mistreated populations of people who generated a better solution than our retributive justice system. And the other thing that I find amazing about it is in the places where it is used, victims of even violent crimes find it a more healing process than the current process we have in place, which is not oriented on healing the well-being of the victim. It is oriented around the harm that the offender has done to the state. So interestingly enough, the restorative justice model, when it is being used and where it is being used, is bringing healing to victims of property crimes and violent crimes. It is giving a second chance to offenders, and it is also helping people find different levels of accountability to each other, so that the communities that are formed as a result of restorative justice practices end up with lower levels of crime. So restorative justice is one of the methodologies I delved into in my book. Community organizing. I shared a story in Transforming Communities about a group of low-income women who were living on welfare in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. And what I love about those women and the movement that they continue to build, which I have been a part of in many ways, as it has grown into a national movement, is there was one day the activists were fighting against some removal of their basic rights as low-income folks. They were exhausted. They were sitting, they took a tour of the governor's mansion to get out of the heat when they were there protesting. And in the midst of the tour, they saw a copy of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. You'd think that would be a wonky, complex, over poor people's heads kind of document, but you would be wrong, because folks living in Section 8 housing, living on welfare in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in the 90s, read that document and said, wait a second, we have some basic human rights, and there are people all over the world dealing with the same things we are, fighting for those same basic rights. We're part of a global movement. And so the reason I know about the UN Declaration of Human Rights is thanks to a number of low-income people fighting for their basic human dignity who recognized their role in a global movement. When we do community organizing well, we center the lived experience and the voices of people who are most impacted, and we build out our campaigns and our policies from that wisdom. So the chapter I wrote on cross-cultural relationship building seems tragically relevant right now. And I haven't been getting into too many specific concrete things that you can do, but I'm going to go ahead and make a really basic pitch right now, which is when the attack of a Sikh temple, a Gurudwara in Wisconsin, happened about 10 years ago, the young people in that community, in that Gurudwara, realized because of the culture of this country, they had been isolated. The Sikh community only hung out with the Sikh community. And they took it upon themselves, these teenagers and these young adults who were second generation, who had been born on American soil, they took it upon themselves to start doing outreach to their neighbors so that white neighbors and black neighbors and Latino neighbors and Asian neighbors would know who Sikhs were and know that they were friends of the community. They were driven by this horrific mass shooting to mobilize, to connect with the rest of the community. I don't think it has to go in that direction, and I don't think it has to be mobilized by a violent crime. What I want to ask now is if anybody on this webinar happens to be a part of a faith community, make sure that your faith community is building relationships with the neighboring synagogue, the nearby mosque, the Hindu temple, the Gurudwara, the Buddhist meditation center. Make sure you're building up a safety plan so that you already have plans in place for how to show up for each other if any of you come under attack in this era of growing hate crimes. And also find ways for your youth to build relationships with each other and your elders to build relationships with each other. It doesn't even have to be about learning about our different religions. In my mother's church, the one that really took off was the gardening club, because the people of all these different religions and races found out that they could learn good gardening techniques from each other. And that built up some deep relationships in a community that was divided along racial lines. So the power of cross-cultural relationship building in this day and age cannot be overestimated. So my favorite story, and I could talk for 3 hours on this one, but there was a community in Boston, very, very underserved, dealing with lots of illegal dumping. All of the companies in the Boston area would drive trucks into the neighborhood in the middle of the night to dump their toxic waste and their, expensive to throw away byproducts. The neighborhood was treated as a dumping ground. The city of Boston knew they needed to do something about it. So a very well-funded foundation convened all of the nonprofits in that neighborhood to find out what solutions should emerge. Now, a couple of people who lived in the neighborhood found out about this meeting and they showed up to it, and they listened to all of the people who worked in that neighborhood and then drove home to other places, talk about what was needed. And most of what those nonprofits talked about was, we need more affordable rental housing and we need more social services. And one of the people who lived in the neighborhood raised her hand, turned to the foundation president, and said, "So y'all need to explain to us, why do you always talk about us and never talk with us?" Now, the foundation was stunned by this because they assumed that by talking to the nonprofits, they were talking to the community. This was a huge revelation, and they said, "Oh, we've got to do something about this." So they built out a campaign. Houses of worship were often the meeting places where neighbors came together and talked about what they wanted for that neighborhood. It was mostly low-income Caribbean immigrants and Latin American immigrants, some African immigrants, and some historic members of the community, African American and white, all low income. It turned out what they wanted was a pathway to home ownership, which none of the nonprofits had thought of because they were just concerned with housing people and not with building wealth. What they also wanted was a path to small business ownership because they had to spend all their money outside the community and they couldn't generate any money in the community as business owners. So a whole different model for how the rejuvenation, the revitalization of that neighborhood came about because the nonprofits and foundations actually listened to the vision of the people in the community. They partnered with neighboring universities to do data analysis, and they are a model for the rest of the country on how to do neighborhood redevelopment without displacing the people who have lived in that neighborhood for generations. So I geek out on that one all the time, and I love the origin story so much. One of the chapters I talk about is on truth commissions. You may have heard about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa and the role that it played in getting that country ready for post-apartheid leadership. Now, interestingly, many of the people who were involved in that process said they made a mistake by folding truth and reconciliation into the same process because they thought what they ended up with was what Dietrich Bonhoeffer would refer to as cheap grace, that there wasn't authentic reconciliation, there wasn't real repentance that would allow for reconciliation. If they had been able to combine a truth commission with a restorative justice system, that would have gotten them what they actually wanted. But what's interesting about truth commissions is I always thought this was something that big federal governments did in the wake of huge things like apartheid, or in the wake of the Hutu-Tutsi conflict is another country that did that. It turns out that truth commissions can be done at a neighborhood level. There was a city that was dealing with the wake of some horrific Klan activity. And the African American community called for a truth commission where the testimonies of people who had dealt with hate crimes and racial violence were allowed to give testimony. And the community listened to that testimony, and the commissioners then developed a strategy based on the testimony they heard. So this can be done at a neighborhood, at a community level. And in fact, if any of you have heard of the issue of moral injury or of soul repair as a result of the trauma of participating in violent acts in war, the work of the Soul Repair Center that functions in this country is the direct result of a truth commission that included the testimony of former military chaplains and generals and people who had been a part of the military, who had served in conflict and come back completely changed by it, and commissioners who included people who were active in the military as well as anti-war activists, people from across the political spectrum, listening to those testimonies and learning from all of the people involved what a different way forward could be. And one of the things that emerged from that was the development of a soul repair center to resource people to help address the issue of moral injury that was being ignored. A lot of people have community gardens, but not everybody realizes that a community garden can be a source of revolution. Interestingly enough, some of the most inspiring community gardens that I've come across in my research have included community gardens that are working to find food sources in food deserts, community gardens that are working to create food sources for people who are formerly incarcerated and have many barriers to employment that would allow them to feed their families. This can offer a new way of, an ancient way of providing for family and community. Community gardens can be a place where stories get shared across generations. In fact, the community garden that's going in at the Oakland Peace Center where I work is an Afrocentric community garden to help Black youth in our community learn about their legacy of connection to the land that long predates slavery, that is part of their DNA and their ancestry of which to be proud. That community garden is also going to be a place where we get a chance to share stories, migration stories, stories of our diverse ways of connecting with the land and our ancestors' ways of connecting with the land. And my favorite example, the example I share in Transforming Communities, is how the city of Detroit has used community gardens to build political power and to disconnect themselves from a reliance on a state that was increasingly disinvesting in them and undermining the political systems in their city. So community gardens aren't just good food, and they're not just good sources of, they're not just good sources of food. They're good sources of building community, and they're good sources of building up alternative communities that are not reliant on existing systems of government that were set up in many ways to underserve the communities that are currently underserved. The model of organizing I function out of is called faith-rooted organizing. It's a different model than traditional community organizing in that it stems from the greatest strengths of our faith traditions. Very often, those of us who are progressive and inclusive want to shy away from what is richest and best about our traditions because we don't want to offend anybody. But if we do community organizing in a way that is grounded in the richest parts of what our faith communities have to offer, we get to build the kind of community we want to live in. And so what I'm saying may sound pretty abstract, but I want to share with you that in good organizing work, people of faith don't have to be the lobbyists and legislators and community organizers and labor leaders. We don't have to be the legal experts. If we work with people who already have those skills, then we get to bring the best of who we are. The best of who we are people who know how to accompany people through hard times. The best of who we are is people who know how to pray when things seem desperate. The best of who we are is people who know how to offer a blessing to someone who feels like they can't go on. The best of who we are is people who know how to bring ritual. And the best of who we are is people who know how to bring hope. In a lot of organizing campaigns, exhaustion feels inevitable, and there are going to be multiple points where the workers, for example, are going to feel like giving up because it feels like we're never going to win. So the picture I have posted here is of a foot washing ceremony, and this was a year and a half into a 2-year-long campaign where workers got locked out of a country club for asking that the country club continue to provide the health insurance that they had been providing for 20 years. It was a scary campaign. People were at risk. Members of the country club would harass the workers for protesting. And on Good Friday, a year and a half into the campaign, some of the faith leaders in the community gathered to say to the workers, when you march, when you risk the safety and well-being and thriving of your families because you know that the people who come after you need access to work with dignity, every footstep you take on that picket line is sacred. And so we engaged in this foot washing exercise to remind the workers that this work that was beginning to feel futile was not just good work, it was sacred work. Now, I marched on the picket line with them, I cheered with them, I fasted with them, but they were better at picketing They were better at articulating what it was they needed. Their union leaders were better at formulating the demands that they should be making of the administration. The economists who were working on that campaign were better at showing the numbers that proved that actually the country club was better off financially by settling with the workers than by firing them and replacing them with workers with higher turnover rates. What we could offer was encouragement and the reminder that the divine was present with them and in them. Faith-rooted organizing to me is some of the most exciting stuff we can do. And the well-kept secret is, it means we don't actually have to be great organizers. We have other people we can work with to do that work. The final example I want to share is the bookends of my book. The first story and the last story are from long in the past. They started small and they continue to have repercussions to this very day. So the final story in my book is about the village of Les Chambon, where long before World War II, their pastor kept reminding them, you are Huguenots, you are Protestants who were displaced from your land because of your religion. That means you are a people who shows up for people who are on the margins and who are mistreated. It means that you care about those who the people in power don't care about. As a result, the village of Les Chambon, once World War II came into being, they rescued and sheltered hundreds, maybe thousands of Jewish people and helped them escape to freedom. But the reason they were able to do that wasn't just suddenly they heard about the Nazis and said, oh, we must do something, but they had a decade of practice of knowing who they were and what that meant they were called to do. They articulated and re-articulated their sense of their own identity. And so when a crisis slowly started to creep in, they already had hardwired within them the capacity to affect change. So I told you that there would be a quiz at the end of this. I was curious to find out, as you listened to each of these categories, whether there were any of these that you are currently involved with.
Great, so this is Katie and the quiz is up. And so there's 10 options. You'll have to scroll down a little bit. Shonda, can people respond to more than one?
Oh, I'd love that.
Okay, so I think the technology will let you all do that. Yeah, so just get in your responses. So we have some cross-cultural relationship building is coming in. And I know when you're on a mobile device, it's a little more work, so we appreciate the extra effort. We will be using what you say. Neighborhood revitalization, faith-rooted organizing.
Yay!
So yeah, those all have equal numbers right now at 33%. Let's let a few more come in.
I'm going to check in with Katie in a second, continue to fill those out. And I want to note that I'm not blowing smoke when I say you could do any of these. It really is about what you are passionate about and who you can get on board with you. I find myself bragging a lot, and I'm not sure if she's still on the webinar or not, but I noticed Marcia was on this webinar earlier. She's a member of a congregation that recognized that since there were lots of homeless people who were sleeping on the property of the church, since there were lots of people who struggled with mental health issues, since sometimes people would wander into the church building dealing with lots of stressors, they didn't have any tools except to call the police. And the police weren't trained to de-escalate mental health crises. They weren't trained to help homeless people find housing. And so that church thought, what if we built up a strategy where we developed alternatives to policing? What if we developed strategies where when somebody's having a mental health crisis, we have a process in place to help them? If somebody doesn't have housing, we have a process in place to help them, where we decrease the likelihood of something bad happening if a situation escalates, and where we can make sure that we're being responsible for the things that are happening in this land that we inhabit. And they ended up building out what is now a citywide and a couple of other cities movement where congregations and nonprofits are learning from them and sharing with them strategies on how to have responses to crisis moments in their space so that they don't have to call the police if they don't need to. Katie, I'm just checking. So that's an example of how a few people having a real passion about something grew just over the course of a year into a huge movement, which made it onto Fox News, which may sound like a good thing, was not great for their voicemails. Just let you know that now. Katie, what are some of the responses we've been getting so far?
We have 11% one-to-one, 22% cross-cultural relationship building, 11% neighborhood revitalization, 11% community gardens, 22% faith-rooted organizing, and 22% establishing your core values now. Where there's kind of a gap is the 0% we have are asset building, community development, restorative justice, community organizing, and truth commissions.
Oh, that's exciting because there's so many good things coming up about that. So that relates to, we're going to jump straight into one more quiz, which is, what might you like to delve deeper into?
So the quiz is up and it will look very similar to the one you just completed because the options are exactly the same. But this time we don't want to know what you're already doing. We want to know what you want to learn about the most. Like what is piquing your curiosity, your interest, your heartstrings.
Oops. So I'm realizing we're really near the end of our time. And so I just wanted to very briefly share with you, while you're continuing to fill out this quiz, how writing this book has changed me. As a result of writing this book, I am now really clear that this is generational work. This is not stuff that can be fixed in a few years or in 7 years. The work that really ended up inspiring me the most was work that took time to unfold. So I'm paying a lot of attention these days in a way that I wasn't before on where I want us to be 50 years from now. And I'm trying intentionally with my community building work to move in that direction and connect with others who are casting that vision. I'm deepening my commitment to relationship and to deepening my connections locally. I'm centering the expertise of people who are impacted by unjust policies at least as much, if not more, than people with solid policy expertise and data analysis, even though I value them very much. And this is the one that's been a shock to me and is still taking time to kick in. I'm slowing down so that I can be in relationship. I'm doing organizing work differently because I have learned that the organizing work I admire the most is deeply relational and is starting community by community and building out from there. So what are the results on this round of the quiz, just out of curiosity, because it'll help us shape what's next?
Yes. So we have, I won't give percentages this time because it's pretty evenly spread, but an interest in asset-based community development, one-to-ones, restorative justice has a higher percentage, community organizing, cross-cultural relationship building, community gardens, faith-rooted organizing, and establishing your core values now.
Yay! I like all of those, so that's great.
Yeah, the top ones right now, and more people will fill this out in the replay, are asset-based community development, restorative justice, and faith-rooted organizing.
That's weird because I love all of these, and those are the three that I get the most excited about. That's fascinating. Good for y'all. We're on the same page. That makes me really happy. So what I hope that I've sparked for you over the course of this hour, recognizing we're almost at time, is I hope I've sparked for you a sense of hope that it's not too late to make a difference, because the examples I've shared are things that regular folks really did generate. I hope I've sparked a few new ideas of how you could make a difference, because again, I'm not just lying to you when I say you really are exactly who we need right now, and you could do this work. I hope I've sparked for you a passion for doing this work locally and for the long haul, because this is how we build out that 50-year vision. We start locally and we intentionally build towards a point where this whole nation shares these values, like restorative justice, like full inclusion, like an interfaith, a priority on interfaith relations, centering the needs of people who are most impacted. I hope I've sparked an awareness in you that you are part of a 50-year movement, that this is our moment to start that movement together. I hope I've sparked in you a commitment to finding some partners for the work that you are about to engage in over the course of the next season of your life. And I hope I've sparked in you a desire to go deeper when we do a 5-module class in October. Katie, do you have anything to say about that?
Sure. So let me click publish. So I've just published a link, and Shonda has graciously agreed to provide some mentoring and a course for us, a 5-module course, and this will take place in October. It will begin October 14th, and it'll be in the evening, late afternoon Pacific time evening, other parts of the country. And the way this will work is that we'll meet live, and then you'll have access to all of the material, and we'll develop written material as well as the kind of live meetings that we have that you'll have access to for about 3 months. So this is 5 hours of mentoring. We'll use the data that you gave us today to shape the class so that you're getting exactly what you wanted, because you care enough to be here. So that's how this will work. Even if you're going to be out of town October 14th, you can still sign up. You can still participate. Even if you can't be there live on Zoom, it's actually not a barrier. A couple of you have been present in our other courses, and you know that this is true. You can still watch the videos immediately afterwards and participate on email and a variety of ways. So yeah, Shonda, do you have any other thoughts about that, or any excitement about it?
No, I'm super excited to get to delve into this, because y'all know that my thing is I can't wait for us to build this movement together. And this is just such a great chance for me to get to connect with the folks who are passionate about this work so that we can figure it out together. There's not a great roadmap, except that there are people doing this amazing stuff. But what we're doing is something very new. And so the things that we have done in the past aren't necessarily the way forward. Getting to resource each other for this work and learn from wisdom like these folks who are finding new paths forward is a real gift to me, and I'm looking forward to being engaged in that conversation with the rest of you.
Awesome. And again, the whole title of this webinar is that anyone can do. Or steps that anyone can do. So we really do believe that. Someone asked a great question, is the 37 for one module or all 5? It's for all 5. So it's like the best deal ever, I think. So we're basically asking for a small honorarium for the opportunity. And so yeah, you'll get 5 hours, not one-on-one, but 5 group hours with Shonda. So if you click on that link, it will take you to a site called Thinkific, which is our learning platform. You will have to create an account if you don't have one already. It takes about 30 seconds, and then it will lead you to the checkout process. You can use just a credit card, or you can use PayPal if you have PayPal. If you have any problems with the navigation of that, just let me know. And again, my email is katevalentine@dsf.edu.
So I recognize that we probably don't have time for Q&A. I'm really sorry about that. I am very briefly going to do a quick thank you. I mentioned that my book is bookended by stories from long ago, and I start out the book by talking about a guy named Father Arizmendi. The reason I tell that story is in the wake of the Spanish Civil War, he was sent to a little village in northern Spain, a village that the Franco regime hated because they were opposed to the Franco regime. And so they had been cut off from most government resources. They were really struggling. Arizmendi gets there, and within a week, people are calling his bishops asking that he be reassigned. He was entirely uncharismatic. He was really boring. He wasn't very charming. He was an awful preacher, and he wasn't much better in small groups. But he was a good listener. So when the youth in his community said to him, "We can't get good jobs that'll support our families because the factory owners know that they can pay us very little because we don't have any other options. Arizmendi said, well, what would happen if we started our own factory and the workers got to share all the profits? Now, that was a little idea in the wake of the Spanish Civil War, over almost 100 years ago. Today, the Mondragon Corporation is the largest employer in the country of Spain, and all of the workers share in the profits of that company. And it has been a model for worker co-ops all over the world. In fact, my favorite bakery in Oakland, Berkeley, and Emeryville is called Arizmendi, named after this entirely uncharismatic, entirely uninteresting priest who built up one of the best models of a company that can treat its workers well. If that guy can build a movement that 100 years later has amazing worker-owned bakeries named after him, imagine what you can do when you are so much more compelling and engaging than he was. So the Arizmendi in me thanks the Arizmendi in you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Shonda. And thank you to 3 people who have already signed up, to Richie and going through my email very quickly, and Amanda and Robin. So yeah, we're looking forward to you, and I know we'll have more people too. This is quite a few months off, so I think we'll have a really nice crowd by the time the course starts. Thank you, many thanks to Shonda for carving out time to prepare this and to be present. And I'll let everyone give her a round of thanks and applause via the chat box. People are responding. This was informative and inspiring, and offering thanks, and yay, Shonda is amazing. So I agree. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for everyone for attending. We appreciate everyone taking time out of your schedule to be here to further your own faith, deepen your spirituality. DSF Discover has a couple more things coming up, so you'll all receive some information about that as well, because we'd love to have you in our future events. Well, those of you who are disciples of Christ and will be at General Assembly, we'll have a booth, so come by and see us at the booth as well. Right. With that, I think we are concluded, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and thank you everyone for being here.